Comment 1. If you're a fan of Elvis, or 0 if you're Team Pat Boone, we want to know. Because what Boone finally admitted about the King rewrites everything. At 91 years old, music legend Pat Boone has finally broken his silence on the one man who rivaled him, shadowed him, and shaped the very heart of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. It was the raw truth about fame, competition, and a secret connection fans never saw coming. Let's dive right in. The early days of rock's two kings, the 1950s, were an explosion. Two clean-cut Southern boys, Elvis from Tupelo, Mississippi, and Pat Boone from Jacksonville, Florida, both charming, both talented, but worlds apart in style. Elvis, the rebellious heartthrob hips that shocked a nation. Boone, the all-American gentleman, white buckshoes, gospel roots. They topped charts at the same time, often with the same songs. "I didn't steal from Elvis," Boone once joked. "The industry gave me his songs and told me to make them safe." Born on June 1, 1934 in Jacksonville, Florida, Charles Eugene "Pat" Boone would go on to become one of the most recognizable figures in American entertainment history. More than just a singer, Boone would build a legacy as a television host, actor, author, and public figure who maintained both his popularity and his moral compass through decades of change in American culture. Raised in Nashville, Tennessee, Boone grew up in the heart of the American South, where faith, family, and tradition were cornerstones of daily life. These values shaped him deeply and became inseparable from his public persona. As a teenager, Boone was active in church activities and early on showed a gift for music, public speaking, and leadership. Boone's academic path reflected his disciplined character. He studied at David Lipscomb College, now Lipscomb University, and North Texas State University before ultimately graduating from Columbia University in New York, earning a degree in speech and English. His refined diction, articulate charm, and well-groomed stage presence can be traced directly to his education, a rarity for pop singers of his era. But it was the 1950s, a decade of cultural transformation, that thrust Boone into the national spotlight. As rock and roll began sweeping across America, many parents and authority figures viewed the new music with concern. Into this moment stepped Pat Boone. Young, well-dressed, deeply religious, and gifted with a golden voice. He offered a more acceptable image of youth and rebellion, one that didn't come with slicked back hair, swiveling hips, or leather jackets. At a time when Elvis Presley was shaking up the norms with his explosive energy and sensual performances, Pat Boone became the counterpoint and alternative idol who brought rock and roll into living rooms in a way that felt safe and respectable to middle-class America. But that didn't mean Boone wasn't bold. He was one of the first white artists to cover rhythm and blues hits originally recorded by black musicians, an act that both expanded the reach of R&B music and stirred controversy about cultural appropriation. Hits like "Ain't That a Shame" originally by Fats Domino, "Tutti Frutti" by Little Richard and I, "Almost Lost My Mind" by Ivory Joe Hunter, showcased Boone's smooth vocal delivery and accessible style. These songs soared on the charts and introduced new sounds to white audiences who may not have otherwise heard them on segregated radio stations. In this way, Boone played a complicated but pivotal role in integrating popular music. By the late 1950s, Pat Boone had become a towering figure in the music world. He amassed more than 38 top 40 hits, sold over 45 million records, and earned 6 #1 singles. Songs like "Love Letters," "In the Sand," and "April Love" became timeless classics. His success placed him second only to Elvis Presley in terms of chart dominance throughout the decade, though their styles and public personas were drastically different. Unlike Presley, whose image was shaped by rebellion and sensuality, Boone projected modesty, humility, and family values. He often spoke openly about his Christian faith and moral convictions, which endeared him to millions of parents and conservative audiences across the nation. In fact, while Elvis was often seen as a threat to traditional values, Pat Boone was welcomed as their protector. But what few knew at the time, and what Boone had only begun to speak about openly in his later years, is that beneath the contrast between him and Presley there was mutual respect, complexity, and even quiet camaraderie. In interviews, Boone has acknowledged that he and Elvis were not rivals in the way the media portrayed them. They were young men navigating fame, pressure, and expectations in vastly different ways, but both carried the burden of being cultural icons. As Pat Boone recently reflected now at 91 years old, he spoke candidly about Elvis. He wasn't just the image. He had deep spiritual roots, and he wrestled with his calling. People forget that Elvis loved gospel music. We shared that. Boone's remarks point to a side of Presley rarely discussed, a man of faith, vulnerability, and inner conflict. Boone also revealed that their careers were never in competition in his eyes. We were doing different things. I wasn't trying to be Elvis. I was trying to be me. That sentiment helped define Boone's approach over the years. He never tried to imitate trends. He adapted, evolved, and stayed true to his values. Boone's fame wasn't limited to radio. From 1957 to 1960, he hosted the Pat Boone Chevy Showroom, a popular ABC variety show that brought stars of the day into viewers' homes and provided a platform for emerging artists. His reach expanded into film, with starring roles in popular movies like April, Love, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and State Fair. At every turn, Boone demonstrated that he was more than just a pop singer. He was a full-fledged entertainer. Over time, his musical focus shifted to gospel and inspirational music, a transition that matched his deepening personal convictions. He wrote books, became a motivational speaker, and advocated for youth and family programs. Even as cultural trends changed and the rock era gave way to new genres, Pat Boone stayed relevant not by reinventing himself to chase fame, but by remaining consistent in who he was. And now at 91, as he reflects on a life that spanned not just decades but eras of American music and culture, Pat Boone is speaking more openly than ever about what those early days were truly like. He has opened up with candid reflections about his complex and often misunderstood relationship with one of the most legendary figures in music history, Elvis Presley. Pat Boone's reflections on Elvis Presley. For years, the public was fed a steady diet of headlines suggesting fierce rivalry, pitting Boone's clean-cut image against Presley's rebellious flair. But, as Boone reveals now, much of that narrative was manufactured by the media, not grounded in the reality of their relationship. People loved to talk about us like we were on opposite sides of some cultural war, Boone reflects. But it wasn't like that. I admired Elvis from the very beginning. Behind the scenes, their encounters were marked not by tension, but by mutual respect. Boone recalls running into Presley at various recording studios and early television tapings in the late 1950s, moments that have stayed with him not for their drama, but for their quiet humanity. Elvis had this magnetism on stage, no one could deny it. But when the lights were off, when the cameras weren't rolling, he was surprisingly shy, almost soft-spoken. He had a deep love for music and was completely committed to perfecting his performance. He was always watching, always learning. While tabloids cast them as opposites, Boone saw a much more complex picture. He recognized early that Elvis wasn't just a teenage idol or a fleeting sensation. He was a cultural shift in motion. Elvis brought something different to the table. He was raw, honest. He didn't fit the mold, and that's exactly what made him powerful. Still, Boone acknowledges the divergent paths their careers and their identities would take. Where Boone represented the ideals of wholesomeness and religious faith values he deeply held and projected through his music and public life, Presley became an emblem of youth rebellion, emotional intensity, and a sensual energy that rattled the foundations of conservative America. While Boone wore suits and sang love ballads, Presley wore leather and sang with a fire that stirred passion and controversy. I didn't resent his success, he says. If anything, I think he opened the door for all of us. He made it okay for the world to embrace this new kind of music. Once people saw Elvis on stage, they couldn't deny that rock and roll was here to stay. That helped everybody, including me. Boone also dispels the notion that their differences meant they were strangers. There was this mutual understanding even if we didn't talk often. I think we both knew the pressure of trying to live up to an image. We both carried expectations, just different kinds. But perhaps the most moving part of Boone's reflection is his sorrow over how Elvis's life unfolded. In the later years, as Presley's health declined and his inner struggles became public, Boone watched with concern and with heartbreak. "I saw the weight he was carrying," Boone says quietly. "The fame, the schedule, the expectations. It's hard for people to imagine what that kind of life does to a person." He was larger than life to the world, but inside he was just a man who needed rest and probably a little peace. Boone speaks candidly about how he wished there had been more open conversations, more opportunities to offer support or simply be a grounding presence in Elvis's life. "I wish I could have helped him more," Boone says. "Maybe if there had been more real friendships or more spiritual guidance, things might have turned out differently. He had such a deep soul. It hurts to think he was so alone near the end." For Boone, speaking the truth about Elvis isn't about revisiting the past with regret. It's about honoring the legacy of a man who changed music and touched hearts. Elvis wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he had a gift, and he gave everything to the people. I think he deserves to be remembered not just as a legend, but as a person, one who wrestled with a lot and still gave us so much. Elvis had a sensitive spirit. Boone, a lifelong advocate for faith-based living, now opens up with striking honesty about the private side of Elvis that few ever truly saw. He was always looking for something deeper, Boone says. Not just success or applause. He was searching for meaning, for peace, maybe even for God. But he was often surrounded by people who fed his fame more than they nourished his soul. Boone admits that early on he didn't fully grasp the magnitude of Presley's artistry. "At first, I underestimated him. I really did," Boone confesses. "But it didn't take long to realize that what Elvis had was special. It was raw, instinctive, something you couldn't teach." He had this ability to reach into people's hearts. It wasn't just a performance. It was power. It was something spiritual. As Boone reflects on their parallel careers, he's candid about the contrast not only in musical style, but in spiritual grounding. While Boone's life was firmly anchored in traditional Christian values and a public image centered on clean living, Presley's path was more volatile. He wrestled with inner turmoil, battled intense public scrutiny, and endured the immense weight of an identity too big for any one man to carry alone. And yet, Boone speaks not with judgment but with empathy. "Elvis had a sensitive spirit," Boone says quietly. "And I think that sensitivity is what made him so great, but also what made his journey so difficult. He wasn't just trying to be a star. He was trying to make sense of the storm around him." The relationship between the two men Boone shares was not the rivalry that the media once sensationalized. It was something quieter, deeper, more respectful. Boone recalls shared television appearances in the 1950s, casual hallway chats at studios, and even occasional late-night phone calls, times when the showbiz spotlight was turned off and the conversation turned toward real things. Faith, fear, hope, and the pressure of living up to expectations neither of them had asked for. "I remember one call where we just talked about how fast it all happened," Boone says. "We were both young men in a world moving too fast. We talked about God, about whether this was our purpose, about how hard it was to stay grounded when everything around you seemed like quicksand." Though their lives diverged in visible ways, Boone maintaining his family-centered life and Christian mission, while Elvis explored more conflicted paths, Boone never stopped hoping that Presley might find peace. And when Elvis passed away in 1977, Boone, like millions, was devastated. But his grief was also personal. "It felt like we lost more than a legend," he says. "We lost a good man, a man who had been crying out in his own way and maybe not enough people were listening." Boone often wonders whether he could have done more. "I wish we had talked more in the later years. I wish I had reached out more often. I kept thinking, he's Elvis. He's surrounded by people who love him. But looking back, I wonder if he was lonelier than we ever knew." Now, as Boone shares these memories, there's no bitterness, only a quiet reverence for a fellow artist whose life was both triumphant and tragic. Elvis was more than a performer, Boone says. He was a soul in search of something greater, and though his journey was full of ups and downs, what he gave the world, the music, the emotion, the energy, was a gift. I'll always admire him for that. In telling the truth at this stage of life, Pat Boone isn't just correcting public misconceptions. He's paying tribute to a man he came to see not as a rival, but as a fellow traveler, someone who, like himself, was trying to make sense of the immense responsibility that comes with influence. Elvis had a beautiful heart, Boone says in recent interviews, his voice breaking with emotion. He struggled like we all do. The only difference is his struggles were put on display for the world. I just hope people remember not only the performer, but the person. In remembering Elvis this way with honesty, grace, and deep respect, Pat Boone also reaffirms his own legacy, not just as a hitmaker or a moral compass in a shifting culture, but as a man who never lost sight of the human story behind the spotlight. A 65-year love story. Pat Boone's marriage to Shirley Boone was not just a celebrity union. It was a lifelong partnership built on deep love. They first met in high school when Pat was just a teenager trying to make a name for himself, and Shirley was already part of a famous musical family as the daughter of country singer Red Foley. Against the odds, and despite the pressures that come with fame, the couple married in 1953 when Pat was only 19 and Shirley was 20. Their decision came with challenges, especially as Pat's music career began to skyrocket in the 1950s, earning him massive popularity with hits like Love Letters in the Sand and roles in Hollywood films. Yet, through it all, Shirley remained his anchor, his confidant, creative partner, and spiritual equal. They raised 4 daughters together: Cherry, Lindy, Debbie, and Lori, and prioritized family over stardom, choosing to instill strong Christian values in their children. The Boones were known for hosting Bible studies in their home even as the music industry and Hollywood swirled around them. Pat often credited Shirley for keeping their household grounded. While Shirley had her own accomplishments as a singer-author and humanitarian, she never sought the spotlight for herself, preferring instead to support their shared mission of faith-based living. The couple remained married for 65 years, weathering life's storms, both public and private. Pat and Shirley endured moments of grief such as the loss of close friends' health challenges and shifts in the music world that at times threatened Pat's career. But their relationship endured as a model of devotion rare in show business and deeply respected by their fans. Pat frequently spoke of Shirley as the love of his life, and even in interviews during their later years he lit up when speaking about her strength, her voice, and her sense of humor. Tragedy struck in early 2019 when Shirley passed away peacefully at the age of 84 after battling vasculitis for a year. She died in the couple's Beverly Hills home, surrounded by loved ones as her daughters sang hymns at her bedside. Pat later described her passing as a glorious send-off, noting that she had made peace with her fate and even planned her own celebration of life. He has since spoken openly about the deep grief he carries and the void left behind, saying that Shirley was not only his wife but his best friend, his spiritual companion, and the core of their family. Since her death, Pat has continued to live in the home they shared for more than 5 decades, often reflecting on their time together with a mix of heartbreak and hope. He's said he talks to her every night, still feels her presence, and believes with certainty that they'll be reunited in the afterlife. At public events and in interviews, he often pays tribute to her legacy, holding on to the values they built together and using their story as a message of enduring love and faith. In an industry known for fleeting marriages and public scandals, Pat and Shirley Boone stood apart as a couple who chose loyalty, prayer, and purpose. Their love story, while quiet and private compared to many, remains one of the most moving examples of what a lasting, spiritually rooted relationship can look like, even when fame is part of the equation. A fixture on the silver screen. Beyond his monumental success in music and television, Pat Boone quietly carved out a substantial and impactful parallel career in film, becoming a fixture on the silver screen during an era when America was searching for role models who could balance fame with integrity. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, Boone starred in over a dozen motion pictures, including April Love and Bernardine. In 1957, the science fiction adventure Journey to the Center of the Earth in 1959, and the beloved musical State Fair in 1962. These films, often lighthearted and filled with optimism, echoed Boone's off-screen reputation as a clean-cut, morally upright American ideal. At a time when pop culture was beginning to lean toward edgier, more rebellious themes, Hollywood embraced Boone as the antidote, a reliable, family-friendly leading man who could headline youth-centered films without alienating parents or communities of faith. What made Boone stand out even among the Hollywood elite was his unshakable commitment to his personal values. He routinely turned down roles that conflicted with his faith or conveyed messages he wasn't comfortable endorsing. While this occasionally cost him high-profile opportunities, it also solidified his brand as a man of principle, a rare quality in an industry known for compromise. Boone's unwavering stance only deepened the respect many held for him and set an example for younger entertainers navigating fame in a rapidly changing moral landscape. But Boone's influence extended far beyond studio sets and sound stages. A devout Christian, he leveraged his celebrity platform to promote faith-based values across a wide array of media. He frequently appeared at evangelical events, lent his voice to public debates about morality and culture, and became a best-selling author. His book, Twixt 12 and 20, a heartfelt guide for teenagers navigating the challenges of adolescence, resonated with millions of young readers and their parents, earning widespread acclaim and becoming a cultural touchstone for faith-driven guidance in the 1950s and 60s. In the decades that followed, Boone's public life continued to be defined by his blend of entertainment and advocacy. He championed numerous philanthropic and political causes, many of them aligned with conservative and religious ideals. Never one to shy away from controversy, Boone regularly offered his perspective on cultural and societal shifts, standing firm even when his views diverged from mainstream Hollywood sentiments. And then in the 1990s, just when some thought they had Pat Boone figured out, he surprised everyone. In what became one of the most talked-about pivots in his career, Boone released In a Metal Mood No More, Mr. Nice Guy in 1997, a tongue-in-cheek yet skillfully executed album of heavy metal covers reinterpreted in his signature smooth crooner style. Songs originally performed by artists like Ozzy Osbourne, Judas Priest, and Deep Purple were given the Boone treatment, complete with lush arrangements and a jazz-infused vocal polish. To promote the project, Boone appeared on the American Music Awards clad in black leather, sparking a frenzy of media speculation, amusement, and intrigue. Some fans were bewildered, others delighted. But underneath the theatrics was a deeper message. Pat Boone, even in his 60s, was still willing to take risks, laugh at himself, and challenge perceptions. The album became a cult favorite, drawing attention from younger audiences who had never known the full extent of his artistic range. While it may have seemed like a novelty on the surface, it was in truth a masterclass in reinvention and a testament to Boone's enduring sense of humor, musical curiosity, and refusal to be boxed in. Pat Boone, a symbol of American culture and music. With over 50 million records sold, more than 2,300 recorded songs, multiple gold and platinum albums, and decades of television and film success, Pat Boone has earned his place as one of the most enduring and influential crossover artists in American popular music history. Yet beyond the impressive statistics lies a richer story, one defined not merely by talent, but by unwavering integrity, steadfast faith, and the quiet consistency of a life lived on principle. From the very beginning, Boone stood apart in an entertainment world often marked by scandal, instability, and reinvention. At a time when many of his contemporaries fell victim to the trappings of fame, substance abuse, financial ruin, broken families, Boone charted a remarkably steady course. He refused to compromise his moral convictions, even when it meant turning down lucrative roles or record deals that clashed with his beliefs. In doing so, he crafted a persona that wasn't just clean-cut, it was grounded, reliable, and deeply respected. His personal life reflected that same commitment. Unlike many entertainers whose offstage lives bore little resemblance to their public image, Boone remained devoted to his high school sweetheart, Shirley Foley, the daughter of country music legend Red Foley. The two were married for 65 years, until Shirley's passing in 2019. Their long, loving marriage became a rare beacon of stability in a world of fleeting headlines and fractured relationships. Together, they raised 4 daughters, one of whom, Debbie Boone, achieved stardom in her own right with the 1977 mega hit, You Light Up My Life. The song became one of the best-selling singles of its era and earned Debbie a Grammy, further extending the Boone family's legacy in American music. Still, Pat Boone's story is far more than the sum of family ties or wholesome values. He played a pivotal role in the popularization of rhythm and blues and early rock and roll among mainstream white audiences in the 1950s. His renditions of songs by black artists, though controversial in retrospect, were a bridge through which many Americans were introduced to a genre that would soon dominate the cultural landscape. In this regard, Boone was not just a singer, he was a cultural translator bringing new sounds into the homes of families who might never have tuned in otherwise. He conquered multiple platforms: radio, television, cinema, print, and later live speaking engagements. From his variety show, The Pat Boone Chevy Showroom, to his film appearances in box office hits like Journey to the Center of the Earth, Boone proved to be one of the few performers who could seamlessly cross mediums without losing the authenticity that defined his brand. As the decades passed and popular tastes shifted dramatically from Elvis to the Beatles, from disco to punk, from grunge to hip-hop, Boone remained relevant not by chasing trends but by remaining true to himself. Even in his later years, he found ways to surprise the public. His 1997 album, In a Metal Mood, No More Mr. Nice Guy, showcased heavy metal classics performed in his signature crooning style. Clad in black leather tongue firmly in cheek, Boone once again demonstrated that behind the wholesome image was an artist capable of reinvention and satire. Now, well into his 90s, Pat Boone continues to be an active voice in public life, performing, writing, and speaking at events where he shares reflections on music, culture, faith, and aging with clarity and grace. His perspective, shaped by over 7 decades in the spotlight, carries the weight of experience and the dignity of someone who has stayed true to his values even as the world around him evolved. In many ways, Pat Boone stands as a symbol of a bygone era, a time when entertainers were as much ambassadors of character as they were of talent. Yet, to remember him only as a symbol would be to miss the richness of his contributions. He was and remains a pioneering figure, a bridge between genres, generations, and ideologies, lasting legacy. More than just a household name during the golden age of rock and roll, Boone built a discography and fan base that transcended generations, genres, and global borders. Over the course of his extraordinary journey as a recording artist, Pat Boone is estimated to have officially recorded over 200 to 600 songs, a staggering figure that few artists in any era or genre can rival. This astonishing number not only reflects his unrelenting work ethic and deep dedication to his craft, but also underscores his incredible versatility. Boone didn't simply record music. He explored it, covering a wide spectrum that included pop, country, gospel, Christian music, patriotic ballads, and even metal reinterpretations later in life. Such a vast body of work suggests not just raw output, but a lifetime of long days in the recording studio, meaningful collaborations with songwriters, producers, and session musicians, and a continual evolution in musical style to remain relevant with a broad and ever-changing audience. Very few artists have demonstrated such longevity and adaptability. Among the many milestones in Boone's career is his remarkable success on the charts. A total of 38 singles made it into the U.S. Top 40, with 6 climbing all the way to number 1. During the 1950s and 1960s, arguably the most competitive and dynamic period in American pop music history, Boone emerged not merely as a competitor to rock and roll's rebellious titans, but as a chart-dominating force in his own right. These chart toppers weren't just fleeting hits, they were cultural anthems played across the nation on jukeboxes, transistor radios, and dance hall turntables. Boone's voice became an unmistakable part of the American soundtrack, bridging traditional sensibilities with the explosive sound of a new musical generation. Perhaps one of Boone's most extraordinary and enduring achievements lies in a record few people outside the industry fully grasped the significance of. For decades, he held the distinction of most consecutive weeks with at least one song in the U.S. Top 100 charts, an unprecedented 220 weeks. That's more than 4 years of unbroken presence on the Billboard Hot 100. For any artist, such a run represents not only creative output and marketing savvy, but a sustained intimate connection with the audience. Maintaining this level of consistent popularity over such an extended period required an uncanny sense of timing, a loyal fan base, and a keen ability to produce music that resonated with the mood and spirit of the times. It also placed Boone in a rarefied echelon of artists who didn't just burn brightly, they endured. Boone's accomplishment speaks volumes about his mass appeal during a transformative era in music when the industry was shifting rapidly due to new technologies, social movements, and changing cultural norms. And yet, through all the noise and change, his music remained a staple on the radio and in American living rooms. While some artists became defined by controversy or innovation, Boone's image grounded in clean-cut charm. Christian values and approachability provided a counterbalance to the edgier voices of his time, but this didn't make him any less of a cultural force. If anything, it gave Boone a unique identity and staying power. He became the voice of the middle ground, bringing rhythm and blues to mainstream white audiences through polished renditions that, while debated today, played a significant role in the early spread of rock and roll across America. In reflecting on Pat Boone's legacy, it becomes clear that his impact cannot be measured solely by awards or accolades, but rather by the sheer breadth of his influence, musical, cultural, and personal. Whether through the thousands of songs he recorded his unprecedented chart run, or his steadfast moral compass in a tumultuous industry, Boone carved out a place in history that is as deep as it is wide. Across a career spanning more than 7 decades, Pat Boone's list of accomplishments is staggering: over 45 million records, sold dozens of hit songs, a major television variety show best-selling books, film stardom, and cultural influence that shaped generations. But perhaps most remarkably, Boone managed to do all of this without ever sacrificing the core values that defined him. He stands today not only as one of the most successful entertainers of the 20th century, but also as a man who showed the world that fame and faith, talent, and principle could coexist. His legacy is one of resilience, versatility, and unwavering integrity, a story still unfolding even now in his 90s. Do you think Boone was right to stay silent all these years? Or should he have spoken up earlier? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood and music legends, because sometimes the truth takes a lifetime to speak.